Our next presenter would be Ms. Brown. Ms. Chalana Brown, visual artist, who was with us last night, and samples of her work were placed on in several of the PowerPoints, and she so graciously has returned this evening to be with us. So welcome, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. I'm here in support.
Okay, I think we're having a little audio, so speak a little closer to the mic and see if it comes in, or use the mic that Dr. Lawson used.
Okay, am I well heard at this time? Great. Okay, thank you, Senator Jackson, again for the opportunity. I'm here in support of Bill 33-0226, establishing the official Madras of the Virgin Islands of the United States. Madras is a cloth that binds us together. Madras binds us to our sister islands in the Caribbean. Madras binds us to our ancestral home in Africa. And Madras binds us to a colonial story that has reached across the globe. While we talk about our colonial stories as Afro-Caribbean people, we often forget that the brown faces of India have also endured the harsh repercussions of colonialism and trade. Yes, Madras is and was produced in India. Madras is not from the Caribbean, likewise, nor are European or African people, but we all made our way here to the Caribbean. A little history. During the 15th century, in the Portuguese and Spanish exploration and colonization era, Portuguese sailors discovered the African Atlantic islands of Madeira, Azores, and Cape Verde. The Portuguese pressed fervently along the West African coast to trade Madras, enslaved Africans, gold, and spice. Research shows that the Igbos of southern Nigeria became particularly fond of the fabric and began using the fabric to adorn themselves during celebrations. Moving forward, in the scramble for European countries to claim pieces of the world in the 18th century, Madras was at its peak. British, French, and Portuguese colonizers wore the material and bartered frequently with it. While the British occupied India at the beginning of 1858, Madras became a widely explored and exported material. The people of India were forced and treated horribly to produce the material more. Likewise, Virgin Islanders were forced to produce sugar more. There is a popular term, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Enslaved women in the Caribbean have seen their European women and their slave owners wear Madras. Unable to get their hands on their African cloth, our ancestors uniquely incorporated Eurocentric fashion and made what I call a mashup. Out of our ancestors' aptitude to uniquely craft the culture we live today, we should always merit their efforts to provide us with a definite identity, since our own African identities in the Americas has been stripped away over several centuries. We may never know if we are Igbo, Zulu, Bantu, Faluni, Hutu, or Bubi. However, we know that we are Virgin Islanders. Madras binds us together and reminds us of our journey in these new lands. Virgin Islands poet Richard Schroeder wrote, "We are many threads of the same cloth. The Madras, rich and vibrant, like our history, is what binds all our we." Madras was cultivated in India, but our ancestors have made this material synonymous with our Caribbean culture. Some can say the Madras reminded many of our ancestors of possibly Ghanaian iwi cloth, Yoruba asoke cloth, the kube cloth from the Congo, and majanka from Guinea. Madras is part of our Caribbean story. After emancipation in the Virgin Islands, Sundays was the only day off for many of contract workers on estates. Women would often adorn Madras head ties to the market on Sundays. The way a Madras head tie adorned a young woman's head signified to possible quarters the availability of that particular lady. We are Virgin Islanders, and we pay respect to the ancestors that made something from nothing. We have traditional music called Kwelbe, which is a mashup of colonial and African traditions. We have a unique dialect, Mison, you can hear it, which is a mashup of colonial and African traditions. We have a 7-layer Vienna cake and a red grout, which is a mashup of colonial and African traditions. We have unique quadrille square dancing formations, again, is a mashup of colonial and African traditions. We have the 4 queens that fought for our freedom and have been documented in wearing Madras patterns during the 1878 firebomb. We have Madras that binds us together and tells a story of our identity in these lands. Again from the Virgin Islands poet Richard Schroeder. I sing of the Madras that binds me to you. I sing of the Madras that binds Alawi. St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Antigua, Trinidad, Barbados, Puerto Rico, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Haiti. The Virgin Islands. Where is our VI pride? We must establish our own official Madras to tell the story of our we. As a visual artist from the Virgin Islands, I am very proud to be part of the resurgence, a movement pushing for Virgin Islanders to reclaim and live the identities our ancestors formed. We can never change the past, but we could honor who we have become. Thank you. I think there were some photos.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brown, you want to go through your images?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so media, if you would please put up the PowerPoint from Ms. Brown. You may proceed.
Yes, sir. As a visual artist, I just found that as a younger woman, I used to often see women wear Madras to the market or to go out, not necessarily on a celebration, but just generally. And I saw a loss of that, and I wanted to make it more modern. And so I used my visual artistry to provide images, because it's important that we document our identities, because if we try to look back, we don't have many images, and I want to change that. And we could continue to have them slide. So I've documented and tried in artistry to show the people of the Virgin Islands their identity and their pride. And so what you're looking at is many of the images that I have made, showing the beauty of the women here, who are the backbone of our society. Next image, as well as our incorporation of Madras. This is Miss Asta Williams we're seeing. I had the opportunity to shoot the cover of the iPhone book this year, and I was so happy that VIA gave me the opportunity to show not just the landscape of the Virgin Islands, but the people. We often forget the stories of the people. We live in a beautiful place, but what makes us very beautiful is our cultural identity. Next slide. This was also on the cover of St. Croix Weekly, and I really appreciate them for doing that. Usually they have paintings, and I'm one of the first artists that they use photos. And I've seen a lot of people actually take the photo and they've framed it. So they're using it as a collectible. This is a beautiful sight. And this is the series I did which is inspired by Mr. Schrader, which is the Madras that binds Alawi.
Thank you very much for your beautiful presentation and the work that you are doing. You make us all proud.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You give us pride and you make us all proud. Thank you. Our next presenter is Mr. Joseph Bess, curator and Madras Reimagined. Welcome. You may proceed.
Thank you, Senator Jackson, and thank you to the Committee on Culture, Historic Preservation, and Aging for having me here today. My name is Joseph Bess. I'm currently a doctoral student at the University of the Virgin Islands, and I have a sincere interest in Madras because in moving away from the Virgin Islands, when you start to interact with other colonial or persons from countries that were colonized and decolonized, the sense is because you're from St. Croix, you're not really Caribbean. And it's something that I have grappled with for a big chunk of my life on the mainland. And coming home, I was very interested in finding research that helped incorporate a stronger tie to Africa. And so my presentation today, if you'll pull it up, the case for making Madras a national fabric for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Some important definitions to consider when talking about anything to do with looking at a country that was formerly colonized is looking at it through a critical lens. And that critical lens could be post-colonialism, which is simply a lens used to study literature or issues that came out of colonization. If you look at mimicry, it is what most people think we go through in slavery. We look at the colonial master or power, and we just copy what we see. And it may start like that, but it does not stay there. We move into assimilation. When we move into assimilation, we know we're a subordinate in a culture, and we know that we're being forced to change, whether that be through mind, body, and soul. And we're doing this change because it depends, our survival depends on it. So when we assimilate during colonization, it's to protect ourselves. But after we quote unquote assimilate to protect ourselves, we move into cultural authentication, because now we need to authenticate what we've received from being in a dominant culture. And when we authenticate, we are going to transfer artifacts that may have been taken from the dominant culture, and we're going to make it more of ours. And so sometimes we tend to stay, if you look at the graph, we tend to stay in the colonial, and we forget that there's a pre-colonial and that there's a post-colonial. And so post-colonialism tries to go through each. The history of Madras. Originally from India, as my colleague Chalana Brown pointed out, the Madras cloth is a lightweight cotton fabric. Even though it's originally from India, it found its way to Africa as early as the 14th century, and it was brought there by the Portuguese traders, as Senator Jackson pointed out as well. In North Africa and West Africa, Madras was almost like a commodity used in trade. Someone would bring this fabric to the continent, and the people on the continent, specifically in West Africa, loved it so much, they would give up things that we would consider today more valuable, such as gold, for a piece of this fabric. The images that you see are from present-day Nigeria. These are Igbo women, and they use Madras going into a wedding ceremony. They do not call it Madras, they call it plain George. And the reason that the Igbo from Nigeria call Madras George is because in Madras, India, where the fabric was made, there was a Fort George. And so there's these contexts of how cultures make meaning that we are taking for granted. By the 17th century, the cloth had become so valuable to traders that more Western traders were going in with the fabric as a lure during the process of colonization. The history of Madras continued. So I talked about their authentication, but authentication has 4 parts. You go through selection, where you pick the artifact that you want to take from the dominant culture, and then you go into, thank you so much. Then you go into characterization, and in characterization, it's how does the cloth now adopt its name? We move from characterization, and we go into incorporation. And in incorporation, it's how should the cloth be used? Okay, what categories, when do we wear it, how do we wear it? And then the final step is called transformation. And in transformation, it's how has it been physically transformed now that it's in your culture. So you may start in a dominant culture by being forced to take on certain things like languages, but you don't have to treat the language the same. You can have variations. So there's 2 ethnic groups in Nigeria that I focused on in my research. The Kalabari, and the Kalabari do not call Madras, they call it Injiri. And that's interesting because that means Madras has a formal connection in this Nigerian ethnic group that spans back to the 14th century, well before chattel slavery. Another group, the Igbo, they use Madras. It is fashionable. It's called George. Plain Madras is seen as something to use for weddings. It is also used sometimes on shrines. You may put a piece of cloth around a deity, and that's important. And then the Jamaicans, and they're probably the only ones I've come across in the Caribbean so far who call Madras something other than Madras. They call it bandana, or they call it bandana Madras, but mostly it's just called bandana. And with Jamaica, they typically use a fabric, as you can see, that is Louise Bennett, one of the strong folklore storytellers and cultural bearers of Jamaica. And she loved telling Anansi stories. And she's wearing what most Jamaicans wear when they wear Madras, which is the red, black, and yellow with the thinner lines. Below her is a handkerchief from Nigeria, from an Igbo family, and they love the smaller lines as well. And they may add their seal on a handkerchief, and in adding the seal to the handkerchief, they've begun to authenticate it. There's a link in this presentation. I'm not sure if you're able to pull it up really quick. If you can, great. If you can't, it's okay. No, I didn't. I always add a little more because I teach, right? So I can't teach the same thing for second period because second period don't know what's going on. So I have to switch it up a little bit, and then third period gonna get something else. So they can't say, "Oh, this is what we're doing in class today." If you scroll down, there's a poem called "Colonization in Reverse," the first one. If you can play that audio recording, will it be able to at least be heard in the gallery? It's okay if not. As long as we can hear it.
I feel like my heart going burst. Jamaica people colonizing England in reverse. By the 100, by the 1,000, from country and from town, by the shipload, by the plane load, Jamaica is England bound. Them are pour out of Jamaica. Everybody's future plan is to take a big time job and settle in the motherland. Hey, what a island, what a people. Man and woman, old and young, just a pack up bag and baggage and turn history upside down. Some people don't like travel. But for show them loyalty, them all did open up cheap fare to England agency. And week by week, them shipping out them countrymen like fire. They immigrate and populate the seat of the empire. Wanna see how life is funny? You see the turnabout. Jamaica live for back spread out of English people mouth. What a devil meant to England. Them face war. Them brave the worst. But I wonder how them guys stand colonizing in reverse.
Thank you. And so that poem I learned a while ago in my undergraduate studies, and what she's saying is exactly what I'm trying to explain, is that colonization happens in reverse as well. We do get a chance to go back to the focal superpower, the dominant power, and we get to impress what we want there, because now we have access to that power. Even if we cannot control it, we are in the space. And when you're in the space, you get to dictate a few things. And so Louise Bennett, I thank her for being one of the first people I met on my road to understanding post-colonial critical theory. Next. The case against Madras in the VI. So I will go on social media every once in a while. I try to stay away. I'm supposed to be doing homework. But when I do go and there's some cultural photos posted, there's a few people that will say, well, Madras is not really ancestral to us and we should be using something else. And that comes from a theory that we have to dislocate ourselves from colonization. We have to move further from it and reclaim the things that we lost in language and in culture. And it seems like it makes sense that you could just tear away from colonization and then everything is more or less done. It's a wash. But that cannot happen. Once you are in a position where you are forced to take on a culture for that long, it is impressed on you in a way that you cannot remove it. And that's important for us to understand when we're thinking about the fabric of Madras. Even though it is originally from India, once it was incorporated in cultures such as the Igbo and the Kalabari and the renaming and then the traditions and the way in which it needs to be wear came, then that made it less of the dominant culture's own. It has now become the culture of the ancestors that we are honoring by creating a Madras print of our own. And so the debate between pre-colonial cultural recuperation theories that suggest that post-colonial syncretism is somewhat too harsh on our African cultures, you know what I say to that? We need to add research and a critical lens to it. And when you add research and a critical lens to it, we understand that we are able to retain cultural aspects from pre-colonial Africa, but a lot of it has been changed, and we need to embrace all of it. What we can sort of go back and get, and what we cannot go back and get. All right, so the case for Madras in the VI, this is the case we are making for the Madras in the VI. It's become a symbol of cultural pride. Although adopted from India through trade, it has remained in the African diaspora for its versatility and ability to be worn in hotter climates. Many Caribbean islands use Madras as their cultural fabric, and while some have not adopted official patterns, they still collectively use certain patterns or color schemes that work better for them. If Madras is seen through a post-colonial lens with critical theory, we will see it does not extol the virtues of the colonizer. It does, however, show the resilience of the colonized to create a fashion that speaks to us as descendants of the enslaved. The distinct head wraps worn by Caribbean women, then as a measure to stop mulatto women from showing their hair to white men, is now a fashionable statement of cultural pride. Madras does not start with colonization. Madras starts with trade. It starts with pre-colonization through trade with Africans and Europeans. It was welcomed by tribal villages along trade routes. The Kalabari live in the delta. They live on the water. That's why they have so much of it in their culture. If you do the critical research, then it will make more sense. So during March, for Virgin Islands History Month, the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts will be putting on an exhibit, and I'll be curating it, and it's called Madras Reimagine, where we take photography of Madras pieces made by designers, local designers, and we photograph it artistically, and that becomes what we have in the museum hanging in our gallery. And we will have a fashion show to actually show all the garments created by the designers. We have 8 designers from St. Croix participating in Madras Reimagine. If you are on the island of St. Croix, the fashion show is on March 7th. There will be a symposium with all of the designers on March 6th. It is at the Caribbean Museum Center for the Arts. You can look on their Facebook. And there's also, I think, a few posters going through social media. The Madras Reimagine exhibit is my way of contributing to the movement that so many of my Virgin Island friends have started. I want to say notably, for me, Designs by Regal and Chalana Brown have helped inspired me to get into the research behind Madras. And I'm so happy that in St. Croix we have this little renaissance going on, and I would love to hear more about it in St. Thomas. I would love to meet the designers from St. Thomas playing with Madras. Please get my information. Please reach out. It's not too late if you need to be a part of the fashion show. The British brought this cloth through trade to the Delta. We know that the Igbo and the Kalabari use it. We know that it means something in African culture still to this day. So we cannot deny what it could possibly mean for us as Virgin Islanders. The opportunity to give us a piece of cultural identity that is not there. We need a national identity that binds us together. And we can do that through adopting the measures laid out in this bill. And I want to thank Senator Jackson for really pushing this bill, and he's seeking support, and he needs it. And we hope that you hear his plea and that you pass the measure. Thank you.